Now we're going to talk about the urinary system and kidney function in particular. Homeostasis is maintaining a relatively stable internal environment, even though the external environment may change pretty wildly. So it's easy to imagine with something like temperature, especially when you're talking about homeotherms, because their internal temperature is maintained relatively constant, even though the temperature in the outside environment can vary quite a bit. Kidneys are important at maintaining homeostasis, obviously not with temperature, but with water balance and, concentrations of certain kinds of nasty chemicals and that sort of thing. So kidneys function to regulate ion concentrations in the blood. They also regulate the blood volume and therefore the blood pressure because they do that by adjusting the volume of water that's lost in urine. They stabilize blood pH. They recover nutrients, important nutrients that would otherwise be lost with the urine. And the main function is eliminating organic waste products. So these are mostly nitrogen-containing wastes that are created primarily from protein breakdown, although not entirely, but mostly from protein breakdown. And then also some toxins and drugs are eliminated through the kidneys. Nitrogenous wastes are a big problem because they tend to be very toxic and they result from the metabolism of proteins and nucleic acids. So if you're going to break down those kinds of molecules, you're going to create these nitrogen-containing molecules that are waste products, and you have to be able to eliminate those. The worst one is ammonia. And basically, you make ammonia anyway, but ammonia is very toxic. It's a small molecule that easily passes through cell membranes, just like water can pass through cell membranes. It's very water soluble, so it gets everywhere. Now, there are animals that just make ammonia as their nitrogenous waste product and just leave it in the form of ammonia. If you're aquatic, you can do this because you can allow that ammonia to diffuse out into the water and it never gets concentrated enough to cause a problem. If you live on land, you really can't use ammonia as your nitrogen containing waste molecule because it's very, very toxic, and to get rid of it you would just have to lose so much water in eliminating it that you just would dry out and die. You wouldn't be able to survive. So another possibility is to take that ammonia and convert it into urea. Urea is much less toxic than ammonia, and so you can concentrate it and excrete it with far less water loss than you can with ammonia. And mammals and most adult amphibians use urea. They convert ammonia into urea and use that as their nitrogenous waste product. Uric acid is another possibility for converting ammonia into another nitrogen-containing waste molecule. Uric acid is almost insoluble in water, so it can be excreted with the loss of just a tiny bit of water. Birds and reptiles use uric acid, so do insects and land snails. And there's a general rule for terrestrial animals, if the animal produces an egg with no shell, and of course most mammals do that, right? The egg may be internal, but it certainly doesn't have a shell. Then those animals convert ammonia into urea. If they lay an egg that does have a shell, then they use uric acid. And the egg with a shell is important because if you're going to be spending a lot of time in an egg that's surrounded by a shell, so imagine a bird's egg or a reptile egg, you've got this embryo that's developing, and as it's developing, its metabolic wastes can't go anywhere. They're inside that shell. So, and if the metabolic waste is in the form of a molecule that can pass through cell membranes, it basically is going to kill everything inside that egg. Uric acid, because it's so insoluble, it can be isolated in part of the egg, and it basically doesn't poison the rest of the egg as the animal's developing. So we're going to concentrate on what mammals are doing. So as your cells are metabolizing these nitrogen-containing molecules, basically protein and nucleic acids, they are producing ammonia as a metabolic waste. That ammonia, because it's a small molecule, it passes right through cell membranes, it dissolves really easily in water, so it spreads throughout the body, it's carried in the blood, and it kind of goes everywhere. If it gets at all concentrated, it's very toxic, so it's going to cause big problems. But it's circulating in the blood, and of course the blood goes through the liver. The liver does all sorts of things, important functions. One of the things that it does is it takes that ammonia and chemically converts it to something else. And in this case, as that blood or I should say, as the ammonia that's in the blood is passing through the liver is converting that ammonia using CO2, it's converting it to urea. Now, the urea is still not eliminated from the system. It's still circulating in the blood, but remember, urea is far less toxic than ammonia. So, as a little bit of ammonia is passing through the liver, it's converted to urea. The urea can be way more concentrated in the blood before it's going to start causing any problems. But we still have to have some way of eliminating it from the whole system. So the liver is converting ammonia to urea, but urea is still circulating in the blood, and so the kidneys then come in to remove the urea from the blood and basically produce urine so that it can be eliminated from the system. You can expel it from the body. So we're going to talk about kidney function quite a bit here, and I want to show you where the kidneys are in the abdominal cavity. So this is, of course, this is human. The kind of lime green outline is showing the outline of the abdominal cavity, and you can see, intestines are in there. But you notice here are the kidneys. If you look at this vertical picture on the right, here's a cross section. So here's a vertebrae. That's the spinal column right there in the middle, and here's a kidney on either side. And you notice that the kidneys are actually not in the abdominal cavity. They're actually behind it. That position is called retroperitoneal. They're behind the peritoneum, that membrane that lines the abdominal cavity. They're literally behind it, and they are kind of protected in a pouch that's got 3 layers. And actually, we're going to start at the bottom of the list because we're going to start out here in the abdominal cavity and move towards the kidney. So the first layer you'd have to penetrate is the lining of the abdominal cavity, and where it's passing over the kidneys, it's called the renal fascia. Then the next layer, which you can actually see more clearly out here than right where we went in, it's kind of this creamy colored material that's around the kidney. That is called the renal adipose capsule, and that is a layer of cushioning fat that helps to support the kidney and hold it in place in that pouch. And then the innermost layer is called the renal capsule, and this is actually the surface of the kidney itself. So you're not going to be doing any dissections this semester, but if you were, if you took a kidney out, which, the surface of the kidney that you're touching is the renal capsule. So those are the 3 layers that form the pouch. And actually, if you look on the right, if you look at the kidney right there, you can see that renal adipose capsule pretty clearly. It's all this material that's around the kidney. The kidneys need a pretty good blood supply because, if you think about it, really what they're doing is they're not producing any new molecules. They're just taking out some of the molecules you need to eliminate and separating them from the blood so that they can be excreted in the form of urine. So they have a pretty significant blood supply, and then you've got, from each kidney, there's a tube called the ureter that drains the kidney down into a storage sac called the urinary bladder. And once you're in the urinary bladder, the tube from the bladder to the outside is called the urethra. So that's the path that the urine itself actually takes after it's been formed in the kidney. If we zoom in on a kidney, if you were to slice one open, you'd see that it actually has some different layers inside of it. The outer layer here is called the cortex, which literally just means bark, like the bark of a tree. Then it's got a middle layer called the medulla that looks different. I mean, it has a different color. It definitely looks different. You don't need a microscope to see that it's different. And then kind of in the inner curve of the kidney is this cavity called the renal pelvis, and this is where the urine is gathered and basically funneled into the ureter and on its way down to the bladder as it goes down. In the medulla, you've got most of the functioning part of the kidney. These are called nephrons, and we'll walk through the whole nephron in a minute here and go through all the functions of it. But that's basically what the medulla is full of, and so gives it a little different color and a little different physical characteristics than the cortex has. So like I said, the kidneys need a big blood supply because really what their function is to pull nasty chemicals out of the blood and separate them so that they can be eliminated. So if you're just sitting around, about a quarter of your resting cardiac output is going through your kidneys. Of course, when you start exercising, your heart rate is going up and you are starting to divert blood flow to skeletal muscles, so that percentage would drop if you're actually exercising, if you're actually moving around. But if you're just sitting there and your heart is at its resting rate, about a quarter of the output is just heading for your kidneys. And that translates to about 1.5 gallons of blood every 5 minutes. So it's a pretty significant amount of blood. As I said, the nephrons are the business part of the kidney, and they are basically little tubes that run through the medulla of the kidney, and you've got a huge number of them, about 1.25 million nephrons per kidney, and it translates to about 85 miles of renal tubule per kidney, which is a huge amount crammed into a pretty small space. You can see in the bottom part of this diagram, you can see a nephron kind of separated out so you can see what it looks like.